All right, folks. Sorry about the technical difficulties there at the beginning. We cannot find our intro clip tonight, neither Dr. Yana or myself. But you are listening to some. We're broadcasting live from the United Public Radio Network, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM from New Orleans and also on Roku TV. And tonight we have a very special guest with us, James Annitto. We call it Deliver Us from Evil. We're going to talk about demonology. He is a ordained deacon. And this will be part one of a two-part series that we're, episode, I guess, that we're doing on demonology. So James is from Rhode Island. He is currently working, almost finished his Bachelor of Arts in psychology. He's an ordained deacon through the old Catholic Church. Has a lot of demonic, haunting, ghost investigational experience. He helps me teach actually on the Introduction to Demonology course through the Parapsychological Education Center. And he's also become a friend over these last few years. So, welcome, James. We're very, very glad to have you tonight.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very immensely.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're with us live tonight, live on Tuesday night. And tonight it was James Annitto. I've noticed, so a lot of people with a background in demonology and exorcism, they're from Italy, but having Italian last names. So, James, where's your last name coming from? Annitto.
It is Italian.
Oh,
It's with a
see that?
vowel, two N's, two T's. It's it's exquisite, right? The funny thing is, I was baptized Roman Catholic. I was with the old Catholic Church. I am no longer with them. I was ordained as a deacon within that denomination, and I am still Catholic to this day. But oddly enough, I wasn't always Catholic, but I am Italian, and as you are correct, most people that have that background are of Italian descent. But there are, of course, a few different variables when it comes to church members and people in the background.
That's interesting. Is it
Yeah.
because of the Vatican and the school there of the exorcism?
I wouldn't say necessarily. So I've never been to the Vatican or that school. Trust me, I would love to.
It's just in your genes.
Well, it could be in my genes, so to say, through my Italian blood or my genetic memory, if you really want to get through that with epigenetics. But I don't think so. I think what happened to me goes beyond my family line. I've never done a genealogy thing. I'm not really very interested in the past in the sense of my family life, but history and historical context does exhilarate me. But I don't know if it was something that it was family oriented or it was just something called upon me through the childhood trauma that I went through and my disdain for a higher power at the beginning of my life. But it's very odd because it's not something, logically as a child. I know some people like my counterpart, Father Bob Bailey, who will be on next week, who is a co-founder of PWSM, which is Presidium Warriors of St. Michael. I know from an early age he wanted to be a priest, but he also had people in his family that were heavily religious, and I believe one of them was even clergy themselves. I could be kind of messing that up, but he'll speak for himself on that. But he wanted to be a priest at a young age. I necessarily didn't. I thought it would be interesting to become a priest because I felt like it would probably lead into like a certain knowledge that would only be obtainable through that kind of study and through the seminary, which is a respectable amount of school. I That's why I respect a lot of Roman Catholic priests to a full degree, because it's 8 years of schools, 8 years of schooling and university or seminary, if you want to call it that, and then you have a year of formation, so it's 9 years until you become a priest usually. So that's a lot of schooling, that's a lot of formation, and that's a lot of dedication. So I respect that wholeheartedly. But yeah, no, myself, I was questionable to higher power, and my my early childhood was being involved in the Lutheran family, going to church, but also scoffing at the idea of the Old Testament and even the New Testament. And I was very, in the sense, rebellious. I like to call myself at a young age a Darwinist, even though it's called neo-Darwinism now, because of evolutionary biology being very debatable in the sense of in the biology field. But I loved evolution in the macro and micro sense. So that really was something I kind of harped onto and utilized in my discernment of what God was, and really was totally against it throughout most of my childhood until I was probably about 19 years old.
So what
So,
happened then?
well, I was 19 years old, which was fascinating, and it, it, it's hard to replicate the actual feeling because, what I uh, dealt with, a lot of people might not comprehend or truly believe in. They could have thought it was like a subconscious, like kind of degradation of feeling. Maybe I was stressed out, but when I was later, towards the tail end of my 18, being 18 or at the beginning of 19, I joined the army. I was in the United States Army, and so I went to basic training. My first year out of high school was actually in university or technical college, where I went for computer programming because I was a very big techie, and I went to vocational school in high school for Cisco networking. And so I did a year of schooling, and then I went in the army. And when I was in the army, I really did integrate very well. Like I was kind of not the lone wolf, but I was behind everybody. Like I didn't not receive attention in the sense that like I was a failure. I would try to do everything properly, and so it was going well. And every Sunday, we had the ability to either go to a service, and if you didn't go to a service, you spent the whole day cleaning the barracks, which was never fun because they would make you clean with a toothbrush. uh, and
Yeah, I'm
uh,
picturing my basic
so
training days. I can totally relate. Yeah, they break you down and then they
yeah.
build you back up. Yeah.
So it was either go to service and listen to a bunch of mumbo jumbo for a couple hours, or use a toothbrush and get on my hands and knees and scrub the floors. So I
Hmm.
was like, let me deal with the mumbo jumbo. So I would probably go to every service that you could imagine. I went to synagogue. I went to different Christian denominations. I probably even went to um, a Muslim service. I went to gospel where they would sing the whole time, which was pretty annoying. And there was one time that I went to this specific church called the Church of Christ, which is very cultish. But I went to the Church of Christ, and I would do the same routine that I would always tend to. I'd go in the pews or the chairs, and I had the drill sergeants walking, and like if people that can't see me, I'm leaning like I'm falling asleep, but I would like kind of get cozy and put the book in front of me and like just nod off, then nod up and just say like, okay, nobody's watching me, and then I get a little shut eye. But when I was doing that, the Church of Christ, the pastor said, "Who would like to get baptized today?" And like I said, I was before we spoke on off the air. I said I was baptized Roman Catholic because I do come from an Italian family, but I was adopted, and then I was raised by Lutheran people. But so when he asked if somebody would like to be baptized today, there was like a sudden jolt. Like it was a feeling that I've never felt. Like it had like lightning struck my body, if I could interpret what that feeling was without dying, right? And it was a sudden jolt, like a light came over me, and I raised my hand. And I'm a jokester, right? But I'm not a jokester to the extent that I would take my time of rest and then get dunked in a tank of water, like, and get undressed. So I raised my hand like without like my body realizing what I was doing, and then I realized my hand was up, and at that time it was already too late. And then I got baptized that day. I got dunked into the tank of holy water, and there was like a 180 that occurred in my life where I was like super like rebellious towards religion and laughing at people that really brought higher power into their life, and then or blamed God or used God in prayers. Then I was starting to read the Bible heavily. I would read the Bible every night before I went to bed. I would pray before bed. I would pray when I woke up in the morning. It was a complete 180 to exactly what happened. And that stood way through to AIT, which is expanded training based upon what your profession or your MOS is. And when I got out of training and went back home because I was reserve unit, so I got to go back home. I was religious. I actually found a local Church of Christ church in Rhode Island, and I became an assistant. I would help with services, so it became an integral part of my life. And then I think really what it led me to is because I was a suicide survivor because of all the trauma I went through. Really, it's interesting. Like it could be turned into a movie, just how insane my childhood was. But so when I was supposed to be deployed to Afghanistan with my unit, because I was a truck driver. I was 88 Mike, and it was beside infantry was one of the highest death ratios at that point in time. Truck drivers and infantry. But right before I was supposed to go, we went to deployment training right back where to I was for basic and AIT, which was Fort Leonard Wood, which is famously known as Fort Lost in the Woods, because there's nothing around it. And when I was on deployment training, I actually had a pivotal moment that changed my entire life. I was caught sleepwalking. And the first time they let it slide because my step grandfather was a lieutenant colonel in the Army and worked and still works for the DOD through the Pentagon. So, a favor was called in that I would be able to be kept in, and they would overlook it. But a second time it happened, and that is when I had to go through behavioral, and that's when they had pushed me through to be medically discharged because they didn't feel like I was a safe component to being sent overseas. Because if I slept walk off a forward operation base, which is a FOB, then I would be captured and killed, or I'd be used as ransom.
Yeah.
And so I was medically discharged. So when I got medically discharged and I was sent back home, I felt like a complete failure because not only was my step grandfather a lieutenant colonel, my grandmother, now who's no longer with us, she died last year, unfortunately. She actually was the first Navy. She was the first woman Navy officer in the U.S. Navy, and my other grandfather, which was her original husband, that of course had my mom, was served in 3 different branches. So when I got medically discharged, I felt like a complete failure, and it hit me really heavily because I thought, okay, this is going to be something I do for 20 years. I retire. I'm going to make my family proud. So when I got medically discharged, I felt like a complete failure. But really what was interesting, because like I said, I was a suicide survivor due off my trauma and being adopted, that because I felt like I was a failure at that sense, that my own parents didn't want me. I felt like if I didn't find that faith, if that moment didn't happen to me at the Church of Christ in basic training, that I probably would have committed suicide. So what really saved me at that pinnacle moment in my life, that climax, was that faith was there, and I fell upon that, and I realized this is happening for a reason. And at that time, I was already kind of involved in the paranormal. I was involved in it at like 14 years old, at the cusp of 15. So I was involved in it because of interest, because of my questions about God. But when I realized there was something in my life for the reasoning this is happening, and maybe it wasn't meant for me, that is when I went fully crazy in the Church of Christ. going from a pastoral assistant to then being an ordained minister with the Church of Christ, after going through my assistancy program with the pastor. So, and then I started involving that in the paranormal and kind of bringing ministry work and paranormal investigating together for when I then collect data. And if somebody needs help, I could offer that religious consultation as well. So it really all came together. It was like piddle for paddle, and like it was not something I wanted, but it was something that like was injected in my life, and it just fell into the right places. Like it was nothing I ever expected, but I do believe that I wouldn't be here with you today if I did not find that faith, or that moment did not occur, because I probably would have committed suicide. That's how sad and disappointed I was with myself for that momentary period of time.
Well, we're so glad that it didn't happen.
Oh, I'm so glad it didn't happen now because I have two beautiful children. I have a career. I've helped tons of people. I've met people such as yourself, and I've traveled the country. I've gone to different continents as well, or countries as well. So none of these things would have ever happened if I killed myself or committed suicide, to put it more subtle. But no, definitely, like it's crazy. Like of course I could take the whole story telling about my life, because that in itself is fascinating, because I would have not gotten to that point to where I am today.
But how did you get into the demonology and the supernatural?
Well, that's a very interesting thing, because I know Dr. Elliott talks about unsolved mysteries a lot. When I grew up, even though my adopted parents were Lutheran, they had an affinity for people like Sylvia Brown, which was on Montel Williams, which was very popular in the 90s. Unsolved Mysteries was quite popular. It predates, if you watch reruns, was Leonard Nimoy In Search Of, which was a great show.
It was a great show, yeah. I always say In Search Of, Unsolved Mysteries, and Sightings are some of the best shows that they've produced, because all you're doing is taking someone's experience and then throwing in like a reenactment for entertainment, unlike today's paratainment episodes that you see on TV. And then
one pinnacle show, which for children, if you take into account, was Scooby-Doo. As funny as that is, Scooby-Doo was really a precursor to investigating techniques, trying to figure out what is not supernatural to what is actually being employed by humans, which most of the time they found it to be some meddling, right, by somebody, even though they were called the meddling kids. But so a lot of those shows, and then of course growing up, being raised by a Lutheran family at 4 years old, that's when I was adopted, 4 years old. So hearing these stories and then hearing about the Holy Spirit and God and higher power, angels and demons. So when I had a cognitive ability to go out and read books, and of course at that time we didn't have the internet to the degree we did. We had dial-up, which was not fun. Library was a prime destination for early James Annitto, and I would read books that I could understand, and then of course reading mythologies, Greek mythologies, Roman antiquity, Mesopotamian times, 10,000 years ago, Hinduism, and I started reading a lot of this material and kind of injecting it into my knowledge, in the sense that I'm trying to intake why being abandoned would happen to me after being told God was so good, right? So but with this research and this search for knowledge and these shows, there was a pinnacle that had happened when I was 14 years old, and that was the release of the show Ghost Hunters, which the team was from Rhode Island, basically in Warwick, Rhode Island, which is where I went to school and was raised. And so when that show came on, I was like, well, people actually do this beyond literature, beside the Warrens at that time. They, they did have the Seekers of the Supernatural television program that was on like local access and stuff like that. And they had their books out at that time, and you had people like Harry Price, Charles Dickens, a plethora of other people that have written about it, Arthur Conan Doyle. So you had all these people talking about it or writing about it, so more so to say. And so, I, between the shows and the literature, I then said, okay, well, if they're doing this, then I can do it as well. And so I would go to like graveyards and all this. And that's really what piqued my interest about the supernatural, because I felt that generally, if I haven't found an answer for God yet, because at that time, scholasticism was big within me. I loved, even though I was like against Christ, the idea of God, I should say, I was still a big fan of Saint Thomas Aquinas, and I really loved the Summa. But so there was no valid proof to me at that point that there was something beyond life. And so when I started investigating the paranormal, I still don't believe I really fully had any early experiences in my childhood or my young adulthood or being a teenager. But it was fascinating to me that people would do this. So I think that when I realized you could apply some of this literature, this knowledge, into a field like study, that's when it actually became hand in hand, and it
But
took
how do
off.
you reconcile all of your knowledge and your investigations into the ancient world with the Catholic
Yeah.
Church? And now, also, could you comment on what is the old Catholic Church and what is the new one? Because you keep referring to the old Catholic Church.
Yeah, so what I generally just say I'm Catholic, but I'm very eclectic Christian. So I have studied many different mythologies and belief systems and religions. I talk about animism a lot, and I talk about a lot of different belief systems. So I am Christian in the sense because, and this is more of a mission statement. I'm Christian because I do believe Jesus Christ was a historical figure. That's undebatable. And I do believe that he did sacrifice himself for his followers, regardless if he was the son of God or not. He sacrificed himself for his followers, and I really vibe with that. And I vibe with that somebody's willing to do that and take their life over somebody else's or a bunch of people else's life. So that's why I'm a Christian, because I feel like I could follow, if Christ was alive today and was doing that methodology, I would follow that person, because that is true honor to take your life over somebody else's life. Because regardless, he knew he was betrayed. That's something we can all really respect and honestly understand through historical context, from what has been talked about from the Romans and from, of course, the Gospels. If you take it as some sort of reality of historical context, but so I'm a Christian in that sense. I do like Catholicism in the sense of spiritual warfare, because the Catholic Church in originality was the first Christian church. Because when it is described as Catholic, Catholic means universal church, even though it has antiquated differently because of politics. But it being the universal church, it started off as the one true church, and I feel like that is why I'm a Catholic. But the difference between Old Catholic, Roman Catholic, or Greek Orthodox is really just their methodology and ideology. Like, most of them still have the Eucharist, which is, of course, one of the sacraments. And most of them have the 7 holy sacraments, as most Catholics would. But like Old Catholics believe in a little bit more a liberal nature, such as allowing woman ordination, or a married priest. So there's the difference. Unfortunately, a lot of the old Catholic churches in the United States aren't valid because they don't follow Utrecht, which was the separation after Vatican II, which was the old Catholic Church, which is based in Netherlands, the Utrecht.
And
So a
when was
lot.
it?
I can't think off the year of my top of my head, but it was the separation of Utrecht. It was probably in the 1960s, maybe a little earlier than that. So when the separation of Utrecht happened, that's when the old Catholic Church came to be, and the Roman Catholic Church does respect the separation of Utrecht now. But a lot of the old Catholic churches in Rhode Island aren't from Utrecht, the Church of Utrecht, so they're not valid in some form or fashion. But that's the grand degree. That's the grand difference between Roman Catholicism and then like an old Catholic. You also have traditional Catholics that have also broken off from the Roman Catholic Church. And why traditional Catholics are different is because they actually still perform the Latin Mass, while most Roman Catholics nowadays don't, because of catechism changes and, of course, Vatican II and a lot of political changes. So there's differences. Like Father Bob Bailey, when he comes on next week, he's a Roman Catholic. He's a valid Roman Catholic priest. So
Valid. He is valid.
yeah, of course. Yeah, because the problem is I see is, and I don't say this in detriment, because I really don't like talking crap about people, but there's a lot of people that unfortunately throw on a collar and they call themselves a priest, or get ordained on Universal Life Church or monastery, whatever it's called, and now they're a priest or an exorcist.
Ministry, right?
So, I do feel like ministry can come from the heart and from your faith, but I feel like if you're going to be valid or knowledgeable, you need to put the time and effort in through academia and through theology and through understanding of where it came from. So that's why when I say valid, I respect that he went through 8 years of seminary and then a year of formation, while a lot of these people that pop collars on haven't only done a year of study and then they're automatically a priest. I do find a problem with that, because then you're making a mockery and you have a lack of knowledge when you're attempting to either consult people spiritually or to get involved with people that are having a preternatural phenomena that might be occurring that they don't understand, and then those people are coming in calling it a demon and then performing exorcisms and causing more mayhem. And exorcisms are.
Do you perform exorcisms?
I do not. No, I do not. I do not as well. I
Or
would.
deliverance. I guess that there's a difference between the
I do.
deliverance and exorcism.
I do perform a deliverance. Deliverance
Mhm.
is more of a healing prayer, right? There is an expulsion formula to it, but it's more of a healing prayer in the sense of like delivering their sins, delivering their mental anguish, their physical pain, even though, of course, it's not going to heal of any deformities or issues that might be going on, such as diseases. But some people take it as such as a healing form. I like to say that deliverance and exorcism, more so exorcism, is in some regard a form of psychotherapy. That is highly debatable, but that has been talked about in the social science circles, and there's a lot of articles on it, scholarly articles at that as well. But it can be utilized as a form of psychotherapy. And my good friend that wrote her dissertation paper, that has a master's degree and is a practicing psychologist in Iowa, wrote a dissertation paper on Hippocrates, where he actually would perform exorcisms to a degree back in the Greek antiquity, as a form of placebo effect, that or form of psychotherapy as well. And for some it would work, for some it wouldn't. So it's very interesting, and I do feel like uh, faith is very important. And I'm a big lover of neuroscience, but there's also a branch called neurotheology now, where the mind and how our central nervous system has a lot to do with belief in God. And you also have the old studies through Hinduism of the pineal gland. So I love all that stuff. I dig deep, and a lot of it's theory. I don't take it as fact or matter of fact, or empirical, but it's very all interesting to me. And I do feel like faith is important. I do know that when faith is thought of, there are, I can't think off the top of my head what part of the brain it is, but we do know that there's a part of the brain that does fire off when there's faith or a thought of God or stuff like that. So that's interesting. It could be all internal, man-made or genetically, that's been passed down through time, through genetic memory. But I still find it fascinating, and I do feel like faith's very important. You
Well,
can't.
you mentioned the
Yeah.
placebo effect. Now, of course, it is has connection with the faith itself. Now,
Mhm.
did you ever use it in your practice, the placebo effect, like telling somebody who's convinced that they have a demon and some sort of malevolent spirit, that you would just say, just go away, and the person would just get better, and you knew that there was nothing?
Yes, many
You
times
have.
actually. Many times actually. Yeah.
What is the
What,
prevalence of cases like that?
so what I would like to say is, I love statistics. I hate the mathematics behind the statistics.
Mhm.
I think all of us here that have a social science background have had to take psychology statistics and mathematical statistics, and some people
I
love it.
wasn't
Some people.
that bad in it, you know.
Oh,
So
I
I
wasn't bad at it either. I have
I
a
I
hated it,
hated
yeah,
it.
but
I'm
I
gonna be
wasn't.
honest. I hated
yeah,
it.
like, as somebody that is going to graduate in August with his bachelor's, right? I actually, I'm going to graduate as long as this last class, because this is my capstone class, so I got to write my capstone. But as long as everything goes well, I'm a 3.8 GPA student, so I'll walk with a 3.8 GPA with my bachelor's, which is, I think, quite phenomenal, and for what my livelihood is. So, but no, but being a statistical person in the sense that I love statistics, and like I think that they do have a proof to the pudding in the sense of why things occur and the value. But in my time of doing this, which would be 20 years in June, which I've only come across 5 cases that were demonic. So not quite a lot. So a lot of the times, a lot of it's mental health or maybe a subjectivity, um, maybe something lesser that they feel like is greater. And sometimes, even if it's something lesser, or even if it's psychokinetic, right? If it's something like a projection, like a tulpa, egregore, or a poltergeist, or a psychic tantrum, as I like to call it, I feel like that sometimes the placebo effect can be very great if they feel like it's something, and you don't feed into that it's something, right? Like I won't say if they believe it's a demon, I won't say, yes, you're dealing with a demon and I'm going to get
Absolutely,
rid
but
of it. But I will
yeah,
then, of course, give them a blessing. I will say a healing prayer over them, and there is a good chance that it will be successful for them. But it also has to be assessed. It's not something like I just go in the first day and I start blessing their house. I assess them. I do questionnaires. I do a 3-phase interview process. I get them what medications they're on. I work with RNs. We have an RN on the PWSM team, so I will relay medications to her. I work with people like Dr. Elliott and other specialized people in psychiatry or psychology. So I will relay upon their backgrounds and their experiences and specialties. So, if I feel like there's going to be an issue where if I did this, and it's going to create a worse situation, especially if they have schizophrenia. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to create a worse situation for them. So I don't always jump to the conclusion that doing the placebo blessing will be the best option. I think a blessing will, regardless, be beneficial for anybody. Don't get me wrong. I think it's very powerful, and I don't know anybody that hasn't gone to a church that's atheist, agnostic, or a person of faith that hasn't felt some sort of comfort walking into a church. That should be a great science. Should be a good population study. I wonder how many people would say no, it wasn't peaceful. But I feel like that there you have to assess them to get to that point. So it's not like something I jump to right away. I deal a lot with talking to them, assessing them in the sense of interviewing them, kind of getting to know them, what their faith is, who they are, how their family structure is, how they live, if they're hoarders or clutterers, If they're dirty, if they don't take care of themselves, do they talk about the paranormal around their kids? Like, so there's a lot of detail that goes into the final conclusion of what I would do. You know what I'm saying? If that makes sense at all.
This is so very interesting. Now, James, would you say that your vocation, as you have right now, is your calling in life?
Yeah, well, oddly enough, I think everything that I've gone through since my childhood it would make it a calling. You know, it's not like something like I said. I woke up one day and said, "I want to be a demonologist" or "I want to be an ordained minister." It's just something that kind of like the domino effect. The pieces fell into place. So I would honestly say it's not, and not to sound egocentric or narcissistic, but I definitely feel like that it was something that I was called to do, something that fell in my lap and kind of was placed that this is the unfortunate curse that you have in your life to deal with this. And I say curse
Well, I'm
because
so glad. Yeah. Because I'm so glad that you noticed that you mentioned that it could be a curse. Of course, that for other people it can be seen as a blessing. Oh, the person can go and just
mm,
chase away demons,
mm,
and it's so glorified, especially through the
yeah,
media, right, in movies. But in fact, it is a curse for people who go through it, who have this gift, right? And even Father Gary, the protagonist of the movie with Anthony Hopkins, The Ride, if you've seen it.
I have it. The Right's one a good is a good movie.
Yeah, so I was talking to him once, and he said that we were talking exactly about the exorcism that was probably like 8 years ago, and just recently contacted him. He's no longer doing exorcisms, people. He's not even talking on this matter. But
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We wanted
that
to
is
have
so
uh,
unfortunate.
on
Yeah,
the
we wanted to
show.
invite him over. But the thing
So
is, he told me, he said, Yana, do you think anyone in their right mind would wake up one day and I say, I want to be an exorcist?
Mm,
It is not the case.
yeah.
But if it is your calling, if it is put on you, then you have to do it. Otherwise, there are going to be consequences, negative consequences to that. So yes, I agree with you. It's can
it's
be a
funny
gift
too.
and a
A lot of
curse.
it's a lot of actual exorcists will say the same thing too, that they didn't like seek out that position.
Yeah.
It came to them as a calling. So yeah.
And try not to do that. Try not to do that.
It's
And
it,
then you're
you,
gonna see you're gonna see how traumatic your life is going to become. I went
well,
through it, so no, I don't want to go back to that. Oh yeah, I'm gonna
well,
embrace the gift curse at the same time.
and you guys know from a social science background is and somebody that is about to receive their bachelor's degree, and I have high respect for both you with your PhDs in parapsychology, and of course I believe Yana, you do consultation for a living. I think that one thing that's important to understand too, even with an exorcist outside the social science realm, I do believe in transference, right? I do believe that those emotions and those other things can fall upon the person that's dealing with that individual. And I think that's an important thing because I've dealt with aspects of transference where my life kind of uh, m- fell apart a little bit because of dealing with these people's emotions and their stress and their anxiety and their preternatural battles that they were having within their property. So one thing that Father Bob told me, and I've heard this before, but I want to give him credit. I'm going to give him a shout out because he's the co-founder of the group that I'm a part of. But I've heard quite a few exorcists say this, and Malachi Martin was one of them. Was that every time they do an exorcism, a piece of their life goes away. Piece of them goes away, right? And I find that kind of interesting because every time they get into battle, a piece of them goes away. And I feel like that can be replicated too as somebody that was in the army for a short period of time. Elliott, who served as well. When you are in the military, I've had battle buddies who served long periods of times. I have family members, as I said, that served long periods of times, and then when they seen a theater of war, a piece of them died with them. And more on a psychological sense, right? But a piece of them died with them. So I really do feel like that when you're an exorcist. And it's not saying that my part of what I do isn't any more chaotic or dangerous, but when you're an exorcist, it takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of structure, a lot of formation, and that's why there's only, there's not just a handful of them. A lot of dioceses in America will have an exorcist. Not all of them will, but the good chunks of major dioceses around America do have an exorcist. Like here in Providence, we do have one. Um, but those are people that have um, been elevated to that position by their bishop for obvious reasons, So, Father Gabriel Amorth, which was interpreted in the recent movie Pope's Exorcist with Russell Crowe, which is a little kind of entertainment based. It really, he was kind of like that in persona, uh, um, and his personality, but the movie's a little over the top. But Father Gabriel Amorth, who was the chief exorcist for 40 years, he was in that position for that long period of time. He was said to have done over 100,000 exorcisms. That's solemn, right, and minor as well. But that's a lot of exorcisms. That's a long time doing it, and
I think he died just a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
And he was way in his 90s, right? Early 90s?
Yeah, I think he died in 2018. I could be a little wrong off that number, but it's been quite a few years now. But he died within a recent time. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but he also used the placebo effect with people, because a lot of the people will just come to him, and of course it's Italy, and it's more prevalent there. Not to the fact that the people needed more exorcism, but there were more possessed people. It's just people believed in this kind of things, and they would just blame possession on the problems in life. So he would just tell them, like, would you just go away? Or the people would just come to him, just like, go away. And people would believe that they were delivered, just because Father Moore said that.
Well, yeah, too, and that has a lot to do with the European structure of superstition, right? You got to think about the European Inquisition and a lot of things that happened in Europe compared to America. Yeah, we had the Salem witch trials and the Connecticut witch trials, which were kind of like a little slap on the wrist compared to what had happened in Europe through France and Germany and England. So, a lot of that, and of course, Italy. And so a lot of that still carries to this day. I've been, I know you say you're from Russian descent, and as we can tell with the Russian accent still, I've been to Romania. I've been to Romania, which is part of the Slavic culture, right? And they're still to this day very superstitious.
That is, in fact, it is. It's not just a Slavic culture, because genetically they're so diverse.
Yeah. Well, they are diverse because they're a mixture of Turkish and Hungarian and Ukrainian and all that
so
stuff.
They're not Slavic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
some of them have Slavic genetics.
Yeah, and well, their original phonetic system too was came from the Slavic traditions. Like I believe their original writing was the phonetic in the sense of what Russians still use to this day. If I'm wrong,
it was actually it was called glagolitsa, and that's interesting that you say that, because it is not commonly understood. And I was just talking about it, and that is, in fact, I'm coming to the conclusion that the Russians and Romanians had a common language and same writing system as glagolitsa, because of so many similarities with the Russian language. Even in the late 17th, 18th century, the government of Romania, at the what it was at the time, they tried to get rid of a lot of Slavic words, and they didn't succeed exactly, because now when I hear Romanian speech, I can hear the Russian words, but those would not be Russians as they're spoken now. They would be the words of archaic Russian, something that existed a long time ago. And I happen to know it because I studied it. So that is interesting. So when you go to Romania, what do you do there?
So I led a tour in Romania through following the footsteps of Vlad the Impaler. I was
Okay, so with Vlad the Impaler, he was a real
person,
historical figure,
and he
and
was a national hero too. Yes.
yeah, he was a national hero. So Dracula, that when he was glorified as Dracula, it was just in a novel. But I know that now there is
Yeah.
his palace, of course, and it's a great tourist attraction.
The
So
fortress, Payori
for,
Fortress. Yeah.
fortress. So do you bring people on the tours there?
Well, I went once. I actually never went to Payori Fortress, but I went to Corvin Castle where he was imprisoned for 7 years. I went to Brom Castle, which is famously said as Dracula's castle, even though he probably only went there once in his time. That was more famously identified by Bram Stoker because of
Right.
the structure of the castle, and it was on a hill kind of cliff
Hmm.
kind of thing, which is a fascinating looking castle. But I've only done the Romania tour once. It was for 11 days, but it was fascinating because I went to Hoyabaca Forest. We followed forms of the Strigoi, which is, of course, an early vampiric legend that stems from the ideas of Lamashtu. So no, it was fascinating. I found Romania very beautiful. I found the culture very beautiful. I found the war of religion there very beautiful between the Catholics and the Orthodox.
Hmm.
It was very interesting. When I say beautiful, I was being sarcastic on that. But Romania was very interesting. But I also then tended to see that at that point, this is when the Ukraine war. Well, it's still going on, but there was a lot of Ukrainian refugees there, and they were able to pick up the Romanian language up quite fast, while the Romanians couldn't pick up the Ukrainian language up very fast, which was quite interesting because I had met a few refugees and they became pretty antiquated into the culture, quite interestingly, so. But yeah, no, Romania was beautiful. I enjoyed it, and I followed the footsteps. I was one of the caps in my hat. What I would have to say I was the first United States group to investigate Vlad the Imperial's birth home, and it, Dracula actually does not necessarily come from Bram Stoker. It actually comes from his father, that was Vlad Dracul. That was actually
Dracula. Hmm.
was his name, and that's how it gets, which also means the devil, right, or the dragon.
Right.
So that's how we interpret now the word Dracula towards Vlad the Impaler because of what people said he did, which was very barbaric, but at the sense it was for his people, and the Turkish Empire was invading Romania, and he did everything in his power to ward them off, and
And he was raised by the Turks as well.
he well, yeah,
So
well,
he learned a lot of those things from the Turks.
he did, yeah. See, yeah, so that's why when Western culture villainizes him, it's because of the misunderstandings of the reasons why he did the things he did. But there he's on walls. He built monasteries. He's on the stamp. There, he's no longer on the money. But because the funny thing about Romania, a little fun tip that I learned. So when credit cards and like plastic cards were becoming very well applied to civilization in the sense of like for tether, right, or tender. um Somebody, I forgot who it was, that came to the Romanian government, and they said you really should make your system upon plastic, right? Like, so when he thought, oh, let's make our tender upon plastic, they actually made their money plastic. So their dollars are still made of plastic, which is actually hilarious. Like their money feels much different than like a US dollar, and many other things. But it was fascinating, that story, because their tender, their dollar, or whatever you want to call it, is their bill, is plastic. Like you can feel it, and it's a very interesting story. But yeah, Romania was very beautiful. It really opened my eyes to uh, uh, that kind of culture. And that was the first time I've ever been to Europe. So, or, that's more so Eastern Europe. But, I've been to Eastern Europe, and it really opened my eyes, and especially that Bram Stoker's Dracula, and of course the movie with Gary Oldman, were one of my most loved things as a child, because of the stories that Bram Stoker had brought forth to us, and the vampiric legends that are very popular now in modern times. So
that's really interesting. Our money's made of polymer, which is a type of plastic, whereas you guys down there in the States still use linen and cotton. So that's it's really really interesting. I was going to get you to talk about your trip over there, because that was obviously a highlight. You guys are listening to James Annitto on Science and the Paranormal, broadcasting live from the United Public Radio Network, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM.
Yeah, no, guys, well, why don't you talk about your case that you worked on together?
Yeah, sure. So that's how I actually met James. Was it was during COVID, and things were quite slow, and I had a lady reach out to us at Paranormal Phenomena Research and Investigation asking for help. So because we were under lockdown and she seemed like she needed help, I decided to take the case and we would investigate it remotely. And it was good experience for the investigators, because there was multiple allegedly independent witnesses. And I guess they were independent witnesses. They just didn't corroborate the complainant. But I had them do interviews and collect all the stories. And initially it sounded really good. We got some photographs of bite marks, scratch marks, handprints that were left on beds. And as the Newfoundlanders here in Canada say, through the jigs and the reels of it, I ended up finding out that she had a couple of other paranormal investigative teams investigate. And one of them was actually James Annitto. She had flown him from Rhode Island down to Texas to investigate from a paranormal demonic side of things. So I had found James on the internet, reached out to him, and within minutes of me sending an email, he phoned me and, told me about his investigation. He did say that he thought a lot of it was being kind of self-prophesized by the complainant. But he did hear 3 distinct footsteps approach him at the house that he couldn't explain. And, there were some dark shadows that would be seen occasionally. So anyway, we started to investigate it. And as we started to talk to each independent witness, we noticed that they weren't corroborating her story. So, for example, she had told us that water had turned to blood in this one incident. And when we talked to the witness said that no, somebody had spilled a glass of water and had cut themselves, and there might have been a couple of drops of blood. And so we said, okay, so the bathroom wasn't covered in blood. And they said, no, like somebody had just kind of cut themselves and there was like a couple of drops of blood. And it was just things like that. And it had got to the point where she wanted to get the church to come and help out. So I know that they always look for medical and psychological. And she had actually had a medical psychological done. So I said, oh, great. I was like, can you get me your records and send them to me, because that saves us, a bunch of work. So she did. And she was a retired registered nurse. She was very well spoken. You couldn't tell that she had any sort of, mental illness or anything like that. When the medical report came back, the first thing I noticed was she had been diagnosed with delusional disorder with persecutory symptoms. So anytime you went against what she believed, she would become extremely hostile. And the psychiatrist that did the assessment also indicated that he noticed that her family was now participating in a shared delusional disorder, because the husband had agreed to move 3 times because of the activity in the home. And he would just tell her if she witnessed something that he saw it too. So it was affecting the entire family. So at that point, I had realized that this is now stepped outside our realm of expertise, because we didn't have a practicing counseling psychologist on staff or psychiatrist. Dr. Walsh and I both have our PhDs, but we're not licensed to counsel. So luckily, Dr. Jim Horan, who's a parapsychologist in Texas, that is practicing agreed to take the case on. So we had given him everything, and he was actually quite impressed at how thorough we were. And he actually published a journal in a journal article, peer-reviewed journal article in Forensics of Psychology about that case, and thanked me and PPRI for the work we done. So that's kind of how I got to know James.
That's
and
great.
yeah, and we had stayed in touch. I liked James' young enthusiasm and his knowledge, and he was a member of PPRI for a while, and then he had his second son, and took a little bit of a sabbatical there, and then he came back and he reached back out to us and wanted to get back involved, and so he re-engaged as one of our New England members, and he's also one of our instructors at the Parapsychological Education Center, teaching our Introduction to Demonology course. And I know he wants to, when he finds the time, develop an advanced demonology course, because there's so many different topics within demonology that you could teach about. I took a course alone just in ancient Eastern demonology. So, and that was a couple of months, at least 2 months. So, I mean, there's so much we can do. I'm glad James is back and like that he's back on our staff. So,
but then there is, again, the information out there is so vast. And even if you go into a particular culture to investigate that particular demonology in that culture, you still cannot get to the bottom of it, because it is so rich. The culture is rich, but of course that you study that through different mythology, through fairy tales, and it's impossible to get to the bottom of it. And even if we know so much, even if we can become scholars in a particular culture or mythology of a particular culture, we still sometimes are not able to get to the bottom of it. And a lot of the times that I noticed with myself, even knowing so much, sometimes I get surprised by the stuff that surfaces, by the names that come up, and those names that I would investigate would be really hard to find, but then they would be an objective reality, meaning that they would be portrayed in some sort of myth of those cultures, right? Or they will be mentioned by different cultures existing of the same entities. So that is very interesting, but that is admirable that you guys are doing this work. And I know that Dr. Elliott, you teaching this class. And we're also planning to teach hypnotherapy, right? And also dream studies. So the plans are vast. And
yes. We've got a bunch of great courses lined up for anyone that's interested. Check us out at ppri.net and click our education section. Dr. Yana's working on a hypnosis course, a dreams course. I know Daryl Walsh is working on a cryptozoology course. And we're always working on something. I've been touring around Nova Scotia this year, trying to raise awareness organization and help fundraise for the Paranormal Symposium, which I'm hoping to have. Dr. Yana is going to come next year, and hoping to have James come as well. There's some possible talk about, I think, James and Sister Kia Francis, who's also quite interesting as well. We should have her on sometime, maybe in October. We'll do like a demonology Halloween month, different people in that field that we and have. So, it's great. It keeps me busy anyway in retirement. So
you do that in October, and I will come in November. That Halloween great stuff. No, I don't need to tickle my nerves. Right? They get tickled enough. So you guys go ahead and tickle them and scare yourself.
You'll take the month of October off? Yeah.
Not necessarily. I don't like going to the spooky places. I get that enough. But artificially created the places, like, of course, that the you is a totally different thing, and you guys show valid cases. But most of the times, all this spooky crazy spooky places for the Halloween on the 31st, and people just get scared there. And just by being scared, they already open the portal for all those entities to enter. So I don't understand this crazy idea of being scared. So
it's human nature to be scared, right?
yeah, but then you guys in the West, it's just like particularly you love going to places like that to be scared. Like you don't have anything else going on in life. Why? Why? I want to know why.
Gotta add hey, you know what I always say? A filet mignon's good, but without some pepper and salt, it's even better, right? So, you gotta add a little spice to your life.
Well, it was nice having you on our show, James, and we hope that to see you again and talk more about different topics, and issues as well in our human life, right?
Yeah, it's hard to encapsulate demonology within an hour, especially when there's a story involved and getting to that point. But yeah, I would love to come back on and get into the cultural context of demons. You alluded to it in the sense of that it's a big rabbit hole. You never get finished with what you learn. I did live by the mantra that if you don't learn something new every day, you're not living life. So,
but at the same time, it is
yeah.
Sometimes we don't need to get to the bottom of some things, right? Like
Yeah.
you just said, that if you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss will stare back at you. So sometimes maybe we don't need to be digging to the bottom of the barrel, right? So
unless you like to drink the whole keg. Who knows?
Well, thank you for being with us tonight. We have been live, and you've been with us tonight live on Tuesday night with the Science and Paranormal on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. We hope to see you next week with Father Bob Bailey, and it's going to be the second part of Deliver Us from Evil. So we'll see how he's going to be delivering me and Dr. Elliott from evil. So we will see that. Well, meanwhile, everyone have a good night and sleep well. Don't dream of demons.
Ooh.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.